The crimson forest was never truly silent. It whispered through leaves that shimmered like blood-stained glass, hummed through vines thick as cables, and breathed through the soil itself. Nessa had learned this in her 3 months, studying the planet's strange vegetation, cataloging species that shouldn't exist, watching plants that moved with something too deliberate to be mere phototropism. But tonight, the forest felt different. Tonight, it felt like it was watching back. She crouched beside a cluster of phosphorescent fungi, her scanner casting blue light across her face. The readings made no sense. The spores were releasing energy signatures she'd never encountered, almost like they were communicating. Her fingers trembled slightly as she collected samples, carefully sealing them in containment tubes. The research station was 2 kilometers away, but she'd wanted to observe these specimens during their nocturnal cycle. Now, as the last traces of the twin suns disappeared behind the canopy, she was beginning to regret that decision. A sound cut through the ambient noise of the forest. Not the usual chirping of the 6-legged creatures that nested in the upper branches, or the distant calls of the predators that prowled the undergrowth. This was mechanical. A low grinding sound, followed by the unmistakable crack of breaking branches. Nessa's breath caught in her throat. She'd heard the stories from other researchers who'd been on this planet longer. Stories of abandoned settlements, of military outposts that went dark, of survey teams that ventured too far and never returned. The planet was classified as hostile territory, deemed too dangerous for full colonization, but the unique flora had been too valuable to ignore entirely. So they'd established small research stations, always temporary, always ready to evacuate. The grinding sound came again, closer now. Nessa killed her scanner's light and pressed herself against the trunk of a massive tree, its bark warm and almost pulse-like beneath her palms. Through the crimson undergrowth, she saw movement. Something large, something that moved on 4 legs, but wasn't like any native creature she'd documented. Its body was covered in chitinous plates that gleamed darkly in the bioluminescent glow of the forest, and when it turned its head, she saw eyes that burned with an unnatural yellow light. She didn't dare breathe. The creature's head swiveled slowly, methodically scanning the area. It was hunting, and she had the terrible certainty that it was hunting her. Her research kit felt impossibly heavy on her back, every buckle and strap a potential source of noise. The tree against her back seemed to pulse faster, as if it could sense her fear. Then she heard something else. Footsteps. Human footsteps, quick and purposeful. Someone was running through the forest, heading directly toward the creature. Nessa wanted to call out, to warn whoever it was. But fear had locked her voice in her throat. The figure burst through a curtain of hanging vines, and Nessa caught a glimpse of a man, tall and lean, with dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat and rain. He wore weathered clothing that looked like it had been patched a dozen times, and across his back was a rifle that had seen better days. But what caught her attention was his face. Even in the dim light, even as he ran for his life, there was something almost calm about his expression, like he'd done this 100 times before. The creature roared and lunged. The man dropped and rolled, coming up in a crouch as the beast sailed over his head. In one fluid motion, he raised his rifle and fired. The blast lit up the forest, and the creature screamed, a sound that made Nessa's bones ache. It crashed into the undergrowth, thrashing wildly, and the man was already moving, running perpendicular to its path, drawing it away from where Nessa hid. But the creature was fast, faster than anything that size should be. It recovered quickly and gave chase, its massive feet churning up earth and crushing plants that had taken decades to grow. The man vaulted over a fallen log, spun, and fired again. This time the blast caught the creature in its shoulder, and it stumbled, buying him precious seconds. He used those seconds to change direction, running now toward Nessa's tree. She saw his eyes widen slightly as he spotted her, saw the quick calculation in his gaze. Then he was grabbing her wrist and pulling her to her feet. "Run," he said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle despite the urgency. "Stay with me, step where I step." Nessa didn't argue. She ran, her research kit bouncing painfully against her spine, her boots slipping on the damp earth. Behind them, the creature roared again and gave chase. The man's grip on her wrist was firm, but not painful, guiding her through the maze of trees and vines with practiced ease. He seemed to know the forest, to understand its rhythms and patterns in a way that spoke of long familiarity. They burst through a particularly dense thicket, and suddenly the ground disappeared beneath them. Nessa's stomach lurched as they fell, sliding down a steep embankment thick with moss and slick with moisture. They tumbled together, branches whipping at their clothes and faces, until they finally crashed into a small ravine at the bottom. Nessa gasped for air, her heart hammering against her ribs. Above them, she could hear the creature pacing at the edge of the embankment, growling low in its throat. The man pressed a finger to his lips, his other hand still wrapped around her wrist. They lay there in the darkness, pressed against each other, barely breathing, waiting. After what felt like an eternity, the creature's footsteps faded into the distance. The man's shoulders relaxed slightly, and he slowly released her wrist. In the faint bioluminescent glow filtering down from above, Nessa could see him more clearly now. His face was lean and weathered, with several days' worth of stubble and a scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. His eyes, though, were striking. A deep brown that somehow caught and reflected the strange light of the forest, making them appear almost golden. "You're from the research station," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Nessa nodded, finding her voice. "How did you know?" He gestured at her kit, at her clean jacket now torn and muddy. "You're too well equipped to be a settler, too alone to be military. That leaves research." He stood slowly, wincing slightly, and offered her his hand. "I'm Ryan." She took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. His grip was calloused, strong. "Nessa," she replied. "Thank you for saving me. I thought I was being careful, but that thing—" "The stalker," Ryan said, brushing dirt from his jacket. "They're new to this sector. Started appearing about 2 months ago. Smart, aggressive, and they hunt in packs. You're lucky this one was alone." "Lucky," Nessa repeated, her voice shaking slightly as the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the cold realization of how close she'd come to death. Ryan's expression softened slightly. "The research station is too far to reach before full dark. The stalkers hunt better at night." He glanced up at the darkening sky, visible through breaks in the canopy. "There's a shelter about 1/2 kilometer from here. Old settler cabin. It's not much, but it's secure. You should stay there tonight." Nessa wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could make it back to the station, but the rational part of her mind knew he was right. The forest at night was deadly, and she'd already used up whatever luck she had. "Will you take me there?" Something flickered across Ryan's face, an emotion Nessa couldn't quite read. Then he nodded. "Stay close. Watch where I step. Don't touch anything that glows unless I say it's safe." They climbed out of the ravine carefully, Ryan leading the way with sure-footed confidence. As they walked, Nessa found herself studying him. He moved through the forest like he was part of it, anticipating obstacles before they appeared, reading signs in the undergrowth that she couldn't even see. This wasn't someone who visited the Crimson Forest occasionally. This was someone who lived here. "How long have you been out here?" she asked quietly. Ryan didn't look back. "Long enough to know which plants bite back." It wasn't really an answer, but Nessa didn't push. The forest demanded attention, and she focused on following his path, stepping where he stepped, ducking beneath vines that seemed to reach for her hair. Around them, the bioluminescence was growing stronger as night deepened. painting everything in shades of blue and green and occasionally, disturbingly purple. The cabin appeared suddenly, nestled between two massive trees, whose roots had grown up and around it like protective arms. It was small, barely large enough for two people, built from local wood that had darkened with age and weather. But it looked solid, and when Ryan pushed open the door, Nessa saw that inside was dry and surprisingly well maintained. "You've been here before," she said, stepping inside. "I use it sometimes," Ryan admitted, setting his rifle against the wall, "when the storms come or when the stalkers get too active." He moved around the small space with easy familiarity, lighting a small lamp that cast warm light across rough-hewn walls. "There's a water purifier in the corner. Ration bars in the cabinet. Not gourmet, but they'll keep you alive." Nessa set down her kit with relief, her shoulders aching from its weight. "You're not staying?" Ryan paused, his hand on the door. In the lamplight, his scar was more visible, and Nessa found herself wondering how he'd gotten it. "I have somewhere else to be." "In the dark? With those stalkers out there?" Nessa surprised herself with the sharpness in her voice. "You just said it wasn't safe." "It's not safe for you," Ryan said gently. "I know how to avoid them." "Then you can avoid them tomorrow morning just as easily." Nessa crossed her arms. "I'm not going to be responsible for you getting killed because you were too polite to share a cabin." For a moment, she thought he would argue. Then, slowly, a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less worn. "All right," he said, closing the door. "But I sleep light. If you snore, I'm leaving." Despite everything, despite the terror of the chase and the strangeness of her situation, Nessa found herself smiling back. Deal. The cabin was warmer than Nessa expected. Ryan had started a small fire in the stone hearth, using wood that burned with a faint blue tinge, releasing a pleasant scent like cinnamon mixed with rain. She sat on one of the two rough-hewn chairs, finally allowing herself to relax as the heat seeped into her bones. Her hands were still shaking slightly, and she clasped them together to hide it. Ryan moved quietly around the space, checking the shutters on the windows, securing the door with a heavy wooden bar. His movements were economical, practiced, like a ritual he'd performed countless times. When he was satisfied with the cabin's security, he pulled out 2 ration bars from the cabinet and offered one to Nessa. "They taste like cardboard," he warned, "but the protein content is decent." Nessa took it gratefully, tearing open the wrapper. He wasn't wrong about the taste, but her body was crying out for fuel after the adrenaline and exertion. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures in the forest. "How long have you been on this planet?" Nessa asked finally, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Ryan took a long drink from his water canteen before answering. 3 years. Give or take a few months. Time gets fuzzy out here." 3 years, Nessa repeated, stunned. "Alone?" "Mostly." He stared into the fire, his expression distant. "There used to be a settlement. Small one, maybe 50 people. We were trying to establish a farming community, thought we could adapt earth crops to the soil here. It worked for a while. Then the planet decided it didn't want us." Nessa heard the pain beneath his casual words. "What happened?" "The plants fought back." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Turns out the vegetation here doesn't just grow. It thinks, plans, defends. We started losing people. Some vanished in the night. Others got infected by spores we didn't know were toxic. The wildlife got more aggressive, like the planet was directing them to drive us out." He paused, his fingers tightening around the canteen. "Eventually, the evacuation ships came. Most people left. but you stayed. He finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something complex. Guilt, determination, and something else. Something that looked like belonging. Someone had to stay. To watch, to warn anyone else who might try to settle here. To understand what this place really is. Nessa leaned forward, her researcher's mind suddenly engaged despite her exhaustion. You've been studying it. The planet, the way everything connects. In my own way. A hint of a smile touched his lips. I don't have your fancy equipment, but I've learned to read the signs. The way the trees communicate through their root systems. How the predators coordinate their hunts. The cycles of aggression that correlate with the magnetic storms. He gestured out toward the forest. This isn't just an ecosystem. It's more like a single organism, and we're the infection it's trying to eliminate. That's incredible, Nessa breathed. Have you documented any of this? The research stations would want to know. Ryan's expression hardened slightly. The research stations know exactly what they need to know. They're here to extract what's valuable and leave before the planet can kill them. They don't care about understanding it. They just want to exploit it. That's not fair, Nessa protested. I care about understanding. That's why I'm here. Why I chose this posting. The flora on this planet could revolutionize medicine, agriculture, maybe even help restore dead ecosystems on other worlds. But we can't do any of that if we don't understand how it all works. Ryan studied her face in the firelight, and Nessa had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing more than she wanted to reveal. You really believe that, don't you? That you can take what you need without causing harm. I'm trying to, Nessa said quietly. I know the company that funds our research has other motives, but the science itself, the knowledge, that's pure. That matters. For a long moment, Ryan said nothing. Then he stood and moved to one of the shuttered windows, peering out through a narrow gap. The twin moons are rising. In about an hour, the forest will hit peak bioluminescence. It's worth seeing if you're not too tired. Nessa recognized the deflection, but decided not to push. She was too tired to argue philosophy, and part of her knew he might be right. The company that employed her was ruthless in its pursuit of profit. But she'd gone into xenobotany because she loved plants, loved understanding how life adapted to impossible conditions. That passion had to count for something. She joined him at the window. Through the gap in the shutter, she could see the forest transforming. The bioluminescence she'd noticed earlier was intensifying, plants glowing brighter in waves that pulsed through the undergrowth like a heartbeat. Blue merged with green. Green flowed into purple, creating patterns that were almost hypnotic. It's beautiful, she whispered. It is, Ryan agreed, his voice softer than she'd heard it before. Even knowing it wants to kill me, I can't help but love it. This place, it gets under your skin. Literally, in some cases. Nessa laughed despite herself, then caught herself studying his profile in the dim light. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way, but it was more than that. There was something compelling about him, about the way he'd chosen to stay in this hostile place, to try to understand it rather than fear it. She'd met so many researchers who studied alien worlds from behind protective barriers, who saw the universe as something to be cataloged and controlled. Ryan had chosen immersion instead, had become part of the ecosystem he observed. Can I ask you something? She said. He glanced at her. You just did. Funny. She smiled. That scar on your face. How did you get it? Ryan's hand unconsciously moved to touch the line running down from his eyebrow. Stalker. Different one from today. I was mapping the territory boundaries between rival packs, not too close. It marked me before I could get away. He turned to face her fully. Hurt like hell, but I was lucky. Its claw was half an inch from my eye. Nessa felt something twist in her chest. You could have died. Could have, he agreed. Didn't. You say that like it doesn't matter, like your life isn't worth protecting. Ryan's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across his features before he shuddered it away. I protect it just fine. I'm still here, aren't I? Alone in a forest that wants you dead, eating ration bars and hiding in abandoned cabins, Nessa said, her voice sharper than she intended. That's not living, Ryan. That's just slow dying. He flinched, and immediately she regretted her words. I'm sorry. I didn't mean no. You're probably right. Ryan moved away from the window, settling back into his chair by the fire. But it's the dying I chose. That has to count for something. The silence that fell between them was heavy, uncomfortable. Nessa wanted to take back her harsh words, wanted to explain that she understood the appeal of isolation, of dedicating yourself to something larger than yourself. She'd done it too, in her own way, burying herself in research to avoid the messy complications of relationships and expectations. I left someone behind, she said quietly. On Earth, a partner who wanted me to stay, to take a safer posting, to choose them over my work. She stared into the fire. I chose the work. Told myself it was because the research mattered too much, that I couldn't waste my skills on some comfortable university position. But maybe I was just scared. Of what? Ryan's voice was gentle, inviting confidence. Of being ordinary. Of living a normal life and looking back one day to realize I hadn't done anything that mattered. Nessa wrapped her arms around herself. So I came here, to the edge of known space, studying plants that could kill me without even trying. And for what? So my name can be on a few research papers that 5 people will read? Ryan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You're being too hard on yourself. The work does matter. Understanding this place, learning how to coexist with it, instead of just extracting and abandoning, that could change how humanity approaches colonization. You could save lives. Says the man who just told me the research stations don't care about understanding. The stations don't. But you do. I can see it in the way you talk about the plants, the way your eyes lit up when I mentioned the root communication networks. He smiled slightly. You're not here for glory or profit. You're here because you actually care about the answers. Nessa felt warmth spread through her chest, and it had nothing to do with the fire. Thank you, she said softly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the forest outside. The sounds had changed with the rising of the twin moons. The aggressive hunting calls had faded, replaced by something almost musical. A chorus of chirps and whistles that harmonized in strange, beautiful ways. The night singers, Ryan said, seeing her tilt her head to listen. They only come out during the full twin moons. I've been trying to figure out their purpose for 2 years now. They're not mating calls, not territorial warnings. It's like they're just ... singing for the joy of it. Maybe that's exactly what they're doing, Nessa suggested. Not everything needs a survival purpose. Maybe beauty exists for its own sake, even here. Ryan looked at her with something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Maybe it does. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Nessa couldn't quite name. Then a loud crash outside shattered the intimacy, followed by a roar that vibrated through the cabin's walls. Ryan was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Stalker, he said, his voice tense. Close. Nessa grabbed her scanner from her kit, powering it on. The screen showed a heat signature just beyond the tree line, massive and moving slowly toward the cabin. It's circling, she said, her mouth dry, like it's looking for a way in. They're smart, Ryan muttered, checking the bar across the door. They test defenses, look for weaknesses. He moved to each window, ensuring the shutters were secure. The cabins held before. It'll hold tonight. But even as he said it, another impact shook the structure. The stalker had rammed the wall, and Nessa heard the wood groan in protest. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What if it doesn't hold? Ryan met her eyes across the small space. Then we fight, together. Something about the way he said it, the absolute certainty in his voice, steadied her. She wasn't alone. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The stalker hit the wall again, harder this time. Dust rained from the ceiling. Through the gaps in the shutters, Nessa could see its shadow, massive and wrong, moving with predatory intelligence. It was testing the structure, learning its weaknesses. Why is it so focused on us? Nessa asked, trying to keep her voice steady. You said they hunt in the forest. Why commit so much energy to breaking into a fortified structure? Ryan's expression was grim. I don't know. This isn't normal behavior, even for them. Nessa's mind raced, pulling together everything she'd learned about the planet's ecosystem. You said the planet acts like a single organism. What if it's coordinating this? What if it identified me as a threat, someone actively studying it, learning its secrets? Then it would have come after you at the research station, where you're most vulnerable. Unless it's smarter than that. Nessa pulled up her research files on her scanner. What if it waited until I was isolated, until I was away from backup? And what if... She paused, a terrible thought forming. What if it's not trying to kill me? What if it's trying to drive me somewhere specific? Ryan stared at her. That's a hell of a theory. You're the one who said this place thinks and plans. Nessa's fingers flew across her scanner. Look at this. The phosphorescent fungi I was studying when the first stalker found me, they're rare. Only grow in a few locations across the entire surveyed area. And all those locations have something in common. What? They're all near points of high electromagnetic activity. The planet's neural network, if your theory is right, would be most concentrated there. She looked up at him. I was getting close to understanding how the system works. Maybe too close. Another impact, this one accompanied by the sound of splintering wood. The stalker was breaking through. Ryan raised his rifle, positioning himself between Nessa and the door. Whatever the reason, it's coming in. Get behind me. But Nessa was thinking, her mind working through possibilities. If the planet was truly acting as a coordinated intelligence, if it had deliberately orchestrated this situation, then violence wouldn't solve anything. They could kill this stalker, but there would be others. The forest had unlimited resources. They had one rifle and whatever was left in Ryan's ammunition supply. Wait, she said, an idea forming. What if we're approaching this wrong? What if instead of fighting, we try to communicate? Ryan shot her an incredulous look. Communicate with a creature that's actively trying to kill us? Not with the creature, with what's controlling it. Nessa pulled up a program on her scanner, one she'd been developing to analyze the electromagnetic signals the plants emitted. If the planet is truly networked, truly intelligent, then it must have a language, a way of processing information and making decisions. The door shuddered again. They had seconds at most. This is insane, Ryan said, but he didn't lower his rifle. Probably, Nessa agreed, her fingers flying across the scanner. But so is everything else about this place. She activated the program, broadcasting a modified electromagnetic pulse tuned to the same frequency as the fungal network. Through the scanner, she sent a simple message, translated into the mathematical language she'd been deciphering. A message of peace, of understanding, of willingness to learn rather than exploit. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The stalker hit the door again, and the bar began to crack. Then, suddenly, the attack stopped. The forest outside went silent, so quiet that Nessa could hear her own blood rushing in her ears. Through the gaps in the shutters, she saw the stalker's massive form back away from the cabin, its yellow eyes fixed on the structure, not with hunger, but with something that looked almost like curiosity. Ryan slowly lowered his rifle. "What did you do?" "I'm not entirely sure," Nessa admitted, her hands shaking as the adrenaline drained away. "But I think it listened." They stood frozen, barely breathing, as the stalker turned and disappeared back into the glowing forest. The night singers resumed their chorus, and gradually the normal sounds of the nocturnal ecosystem returned. Nessa's legs gave out, and she collapsed into the chair. Ryan knelt beside her, his hand finding hers. His touch was warm, solid, real. "You just talked to an entire planet," he said, wonder in his voice. And it talked back. Nessa looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. In the firelight, his eyes were soft, amazed, and something else. Something that made her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said quietly. "Without your understanding of how this place works, without your observations and theories, I never would have made the connection." Ryan's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. "We make a good team." "We do," Nessa agreed, and suddenly the air between them felt charged again, but differently than before. Not with fear or urgency, but with possibility. Ryan seemed to realize how close they were, and pulled back slightly, though he didn't release her hand. "You should rest. It's been a long day, and tomorrow we need to get you back to the research station safely." Nessa didn't want to rest. She wanted to analyze what had just happened, to understand the implications of successful communication with a planetary intelligence. But her body was exhausted, running on fumes and adrenaline, and Ryan was right. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions. "Will you stay?" she asked. "Just for tonight?" Something flickered across his face. Longing, maybe, mixed with caution. "I'll stay," he said finally. "I'll take first watch, make sure nothing else comes calling." Nessa wanted to protest that he needed rest too, but she was too tired to argue. She curled up on the small cot in the corner, pulling the rough blanket over herself. From across the room, she watched Ryan settle back into his chair, his rifle across his lap, his gaze fixed on the door. Even exhausted and weary, there was something beautiful about him. Something that spoke of strength and gentleness in equal measure, as she drifted toward sleep, lulled by the warmth of the fire and the distant chorus of night singers. Nessa found herself thinking that maybe she'd found something more valuable than research data on this hostile alien world. Maybe she'd found someone who understood what it meant to love something dangerous. Something that could kill you, but also fill you with wonder. Someone who chose knowledge over safety, understanding over fear. Someone who, like her, was looking for meaning in the spaces between stars. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that she didn't want to leave this cabin in the morning, didn't want to return to the sterile research station and the colleagues who saw this planet only as a resource to be mined. She wanted to stay here, in this small sanctuary, with the man who'd chosen to make a home in the wilderness. But tomorrow would come regardless of what she wanted. And with it, decisions that would change everything.